Hi, I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. We have a great episode for you today, folks. Keean Bexte, my co-founder here at Juno News, is joining us in just a few minutes. And guess what, folks? Today is the 6-month anniversary since we launched this organization, Juno News, since Keean Bexte from Countersignal and myself from True North teamed up together to launch a new free speech news outlet focused on fact-based journalism and telling the truth. It has been an incredible ride so far, so we're going to go through some of the highlights. And folks, this episode is brought to you by ExpressVPN, but more on them a little bit later. I want to tell you about this new survey that was put out today by Angus Reid, talking about one of what I think is one of the most important issues in the country, which is the story of the unmarked graves, the alleged unmarked graves that were allegedly discovered in Kamloops back in 2021. You can draw a straight line from that announcement, that bombshell, the absolutely hyperbolic, over-exaggerated media claims that started calling them mass graves, and then all of a sudden we had to say that Canada had committed genocide, making all kinds of unfounded accusations against our country. You can draw a straight line to that and some of the craziness that is unfolding today, including the story I mentioned yesterday about a judge ruling that private property had become First Nations property. I'm going to talk about that again in just a few minutes, but first I want to go through this Angus Reid story because it is really interesting, and I think it's really good news for us here at Juno News and for the truth in Canada. 2/3 of Canadians, according to this study, want additional evidence before accepting that soil anomalies represent unmarked graves at Kamloops School. So this is something that they wouldn't have even asked about, wouldn't have even talked about a few years ago, and you can really see how the country has shifted. In fact, when you take a closer look, you ask Canadians, which one is closer to your view? So in the blue, 37% accept the claim that this is evidence of unmarked graves, even if no further information is offered, 37%, which, folks, I still think that number is way too high. 37% of people are willing to accept that priests and nuns and school teachers were murdering children and clandestinely burying them in mass graves at residential schools. And they don't want any more evidence. They just believe that claim and they're happy with it, and they just want to believe First Nations claims and move on. But the more kind of optimistic side, the thing that makes me feel confident and happy, is that 67% of Canadians say, I don't think so. They say, we will only accept this claim if further information is publicly available through verified through an excavation. So we will not believe that there are mass graves at residential schools unless we find human remains and evidence. So let's treat these as a criminal investigation rather than just a political claim, which is basically what's happened so far. When you take a closer look at the regional breakdown, you can see that the number of people who are skeptical and want more evidence is highest in the prairies, 74% in Alberta, 72% in Saskatchewan, 75% in Manitoba. In British Columbia, I guess it's just pretty much the Canadian average. 64% say that they want more evidence, 36% say believe the claims. And interestingly, the out in Quebec, you see the highest number of people saying just accept the claim without evidence. 45% and 55% say that they want more. Not surprisingly, the gender breakdown here is such that women are more likely to believe a claim without evidence and just say, like, it's my truth or it's their truth. Let's just believe their truth. Basically, so you can see young women in particularly, this is the only demographic in the country that the people who just say believe their truth, 56%, whereas only 44% want more evidence. With older women, you get a little bit more sensibility, and you can see with the men, it's really lopsided. Even young men, 37% want to believe their truth, and 67% want more evidence. For 35 to 54, it's only 27% versus 73% say we want more evidence, and the same for older men. Now, interestingly, the next question they asked, 3 in 5 Canadians, 62%, oppose making residential school denialism a criminal offense. And basically, it's even more damning. Look, the idea that you would criminalize speech, so just asking questions about residential school, doing the kind of journalism that we do here at Juno News every day, that I do on the Candice Malcolm Show frequently, or someone like Professor Frances Widdowson and their book that they put together, Grave Error, she's been going, and just basically telling the truth and talking about what evidence actually exists, giving a historical recount of what the Indian residential schools were actually like. Basically, this new law that's being proposed by the NDP, banning residential school denialism, would make what she's doing a crime, would make what I'm doing a crime. Our book, Grave Error, they specifically cite this book as an example of so-called residential school denialism. And so whether Canadians actually support this, the way that the survey says 62% oppose, but it's actually much more than that, because you always have 15% or so of people that just don't know. They're not familiar enough with the issue. And so if you look at the actual number of people who would be in favor of, making something like this illegal, saying you cannot talk about this kind of thing, you get like 8%, 10% of Canadians, and plus 16, so maybe like 25% of Canadians, which again is still too high. Still too high. 1 in 4 Canadians want to ban speech, basically. But the fact that the majority of the country is saying the other thing, I think is good news. This is why Juno News exists, folks. We exist in part because of stories like the Unmarked grave. Well, I think it's a hoax. I know Francis Widdowson just thinks it's media deception, that it's not necessarily a hoax because there's no one necessarily behind it, pushing it. I do think that a lot of the bands that came out and claimed to have discovered unmarked graves and bodies, they knew that they didn't actually have evidence and they went with it anyway. So I would consider that a hoax. And certainly a lot of members in the media that continue to push this story without the facts. We exposed Jordan Tucker of the CBC doing exactly that, and Francis Widdowson had it on tape. I encourage you to go check out that episode and go listen to that. I want to respond to something from our show yesterday. So yesterday, we talked about this absolute bombshell BC Supreme Court case that ruled that 800 acres of land in Richmond, British Columbia, belongs to the Cowichan First Nations. Basically, this land, which is industrial land, is partially Crown land, partially owned by the government, and also some private property, that the land titles are invalid. This is what the judge ruled, that the land titles invalid and defective, and therefore it actually rightfully belongs to the Cowichan tribe, just based on oral history. The tribe said that they went there and they did fishing expeditions, and that's where they caught salmon in the summer. And the court case was going on for 5 years, the longest court case in Canadian history. And the judge ruled that the land actually belongs to the First Nations. Now, I did my show about it. I talked about how this is an absolute threat to everything that we believe in our country, right? Our country is founded on private properties. I tend to believe that private property and freedom are intrinsically linked. You cannot be free if you don't have the right to your property. Fundamentally, I think that's part of the biggest problem with First Nations in Canada. Why they don't have the same level of prosperity that you and I can achieve, because they don't have the same private property rights. Private property is so important. And so when you have a judge ruling, as this judge did in British Columbia, Judge Barbara Young, who, by the way, one of my viewers pointed out, was appointed by Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper, the Conservative Prime Minister, one of his biggest failings as a Prime Minister is his appointments, his legal appointments. I'm a fan of Stephen Harper. I used to work in his government. I think he did a lot right, but his judicial appointments were atrocious. And so this is one example of that, Barbara Young. Now, I will note that there are a couple of, there's been a couple of pieces and people pushing back against what I claimed in my show yesterday. Notably, Terry Glavin in the National Post, his highlight says, a better response to BC's Cowichan land ruling, calm down. And so he basically says this isn't really about private property. I know that the folks over at Northern Perspective likewise did a fact check. Did BC Supreme Court steal private land and give it to First Nations? Here's the truth. Look, I disagree with Ryan and Tanya on this one, and I'm happy to have them on my show. So Ryan, if you're watching, come on the Candice Malcolm Show and we will debate this, because I think that this is an absolutely dangerous precedent. And it says right here in the judge's ruling that this will only affect private property when the property is sold. So here, right here from the Globe Mail story, there are some privately held properties, but lawyers involved in the case say that if the ruling stands, that land would not be affected until it was sold. So until it's sold, I never said that they're going to get kicked off their land today, or that's going to happen now. But obviously, if you own a property and the government suddenly says that your title is invalid and defective, and when you sell it, you're not going to have the title anymore, or the person who's buying it from you, I mean, the value is gone. So you've lost your nest egg. You've lost your whatever you're planning for, retirement, or to give to your children as inheritance. You've lost the value of your private property. It is incredibly dangerous precedent. It is incredibly dangerous that a judge can do this based on oral history. Again, Justice Young wrote in her declaration that this will change a long-established status quo and have significant impact for those involved with the lands. So not saying that anyone's going to get kicked off their lands. I'm not saying that this is like a South African situation where someone is going to come and kick you off your land and take it. But that is the direction that we're headed. That is definitely the direction that we're headed. And it's a bit complicated. I'm from British Columbia. I still have many family members over there. And so I know that there are lots of places in British Columbia that are on what they call 99-year leases, right? So it's a leasehold property, not a freehold property. If it's a freehold property, you own it free and clear. If it's a leasehold, there's a set 99-year lease, and then you have however much time is left on that lease, and ultimately would be up to the band to decide whether they would renew it or not at the end of that. And so if you bought something as a freehold, and then suddenly the government changes it to a leasehold, obviously that impacts the value of your property. And it is a scary, scary concept. The idea that a judge can determine to take away your property in a free and democratic society means that that country isn't very free and very democratic anymore. Okay, folks, I want to bring on Keean Bexte, but before I do, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's show. This is a new sponsor, very excited to have them, ExpressVPN. So Justin Trudeau laid the groundwork, but now with Carney in charge, it feels like the government's getting bolder about deciding what you're allowed to see online. News stories disappear from social media, content gets blocked, and it's all framed as safety and regulation. But really, it's about control. You and I both know that. That's why I use ExpressVPN. It lets me get around those blocks and access the internet like a free person, not just whatever Ottawa decides is acceptable for me to see. You can do the same. So go visit CandiceMalcolm.com/ExpressVPN. Again, that's CandiceMalcolm.com/ExpressVPN. And viewers of the Candice Malcolm Show get a special 4 months for free when you sign up. Sign up today, CandiceMalcolm.com/ExpressVPN. Okay, I am pleased to welcome my co-founder at Juno News, Keean Bexte. Keean, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And happy anniversary, man! It's been 6 months. I didn't get you any chocolate or any flowers, but it's been a fun ride so far. So, what stands out for you so far, 6 months in?
Well, I would be remiss to not mention the election. Any of our viewers will remember the impact that we had. We covered, I think, tons of really, really interesting content back then. And I think that was our first or second month of operation, and we had close to 8 million views in the month of the election, which is just insane numbers. Like that eclipses a lot of the mainstream media in terms of what they're able to get. But it speaks to why we do this. One, because we are having a huge impact. We're able to inform Canadians when the mainstream media fails to do so, when they try to sweep things under the rug or lie about them. Worst case scenario, we come in with the truth, uncensored, unfiltered, and it's honest. And sometimes it doesn't, it doesn't make people feel good. It doesn't hold any punches, and we always like to punch up here. But it's got to be done. And people, the numbers speak for themselves. When people are, I think we are the largest independent news network in the country now. We're growing so quickly, and it speaks to how valuable of a service Juno News is providing to Canadians right now.
Well, 100%. And I remember, I agree with you. 8 million was incredible during the election. But Keean, I looked at it just this morning to see what our views were like on our website. And, you think it's the summer, it's kind of slow. Most people are kind of not as engaged in political news as they might be when the House is in session or during election. Just in the last 30 days, so the second half of July, the first half of August, we've had 10.2 million visitors on our website. So Juno has continued to grow, continue having big influence. I think we are the biggest in terms of subscription. And it's kind of funny, Keean, because I know that when you and I first started discussing the possibility of a merger or working together, we were kind of imagining that there would be a Pierre Poilievre government and that potentially he would be defunding the CBC. And we were talking about how Canadians need an alternative, right? If CBC is going to get defunded, they'll probably disappear or at least get very diminished because they don't really have a good business case. And so where are Canadians going to get their news? Where are they going to get their fact-based journalism from? And that's what we wanted to provide. Things have obviously changed. I think that President Donald Trump, with the tariffs and the 51st state rhetoric, really threw a curveball into the Canadian election. The election did not go the way that I wanted it. I don't think you were happy with the result. And so here we are. We live to fight another day. And I think that independent media is even more important when we are facing sort of the liberal tyranny that we live under, where we just have, governments that believe in censoring the internet, governments believe in government-funded journalism, like totally the antithesis of what Canada is supposed to stand for, right? We still have mass migration. We still have deception around First Nations and the history of our country being rewritten. There's so many problems that were created under Trudeau, and we sort of see a continuation under Mark Carney. So how do you think that changes the job that you and I do on a daily basis?
Well, when I was imagining a PR government, I was looking at it from the perspective of pulling him to the right, and making sure that he didn't think that he could just go. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze. I was worried that he was going to think that he could govern to the center. My goodness. Um, and it was our goal to pull him to the right, to make sure that he was held accountable to a conservative audience, to the conservative base that elected him. Now that that hasn't happened, I don't know if our my goal has really changed. I want to make sure that Mark Carney isn't allowed to run wild with the leftists that propped up Justin Trudeau over the last 10 years. Our job is to hold him accountable from every direction, to make sure that his conflicts of interests are exposed, to make sure that the bogus and garbage legislation that the morons that were propping up Trudeau are still pushing forward is exposed, and that Canadians understand exactly the situation that our country is in. And it's not just Mark Carney that we need to focus on. It's not just Pierre Poilievre that we need to focus on. These activist judges that are rewriting the foundation of what it means to be Canadian and to live in Canada, by handing private property to radical and to these radical Indian bands, is wrong, and Canadians will not stand by it. The CBC will, though. And that means that we need to be there to explain to Canadians what is happening, to read through the court rulings, read through the facts, digest it, and share it, and inform Canadians so that they know what's going on, so that they have the information that they need to stand up and fight back themselves. And that's a job that I take deeply personally. And I think that it's extremely important that we do so, because when it comes to protecting Canadians' right to private property, that's one thing. But we're also on the front lines of protecting free speech. We're on the front lines of protecting the rights of people to be journalists and to be media in this country, which the sands are shifting under our feet as we speak. Justin, it started, you said it about this ExpressVPN thing just a few minutes ago. It started with Justin Trudeau, but Mark Carney hasn't changed the tune of the Liberal government, the government of Canada, when it comes to attacking journalists, attacking free speech, and changing the rules that we've expected to be true for the last century and a half of Canada existing. We thought that this was a free country. We thought that the media had inalienable rights that the government couldn't interfere with. That's turning out to not be true. And Mark Carney has to be held accountable for that.
Well, 100%. And it's not just the federal government, it's not just the Liberals. There's a problem in our media landscape and with a lot of the other voices in media, right? So basically what happened in this country is that the CBC was always kind of left-leaning. And I don't know, sometime around the first Trump administration, they just went hard left, hard left. It became sort of a post-truth world where they didn't even care about facts. They only cared about narratives. And the rest of the legacy media kind of went along with it. Like you had to, it was kind of like a cultural revolution in China. Like you kind of had to like browbeat anyone who had dissenting views. And basically they purged conservative or just common sense voices from the legacy media, or previously common sense people like Charles Adler used to be kind of more on the political right. He shifted hard to the political left, right? And so the media took a marked step to the left. They went more and more left wing, and they've removed conservative, even centrist voices from their platforms. A couple of notable examples: Andrew Lawton, who was a longtime radio host in London, Ontario, got removed because they just didn't want pro-life voice on their airwaves. I was eventually removed from my column. I'd written a column for 8 years, almost a decade, in the Toronto Sun. It was syndicated across Post Media, and I got removed from that in 2021. And so they basically just decided that they didn't want want any conservative voices in the media. And what did that do? That created a market space, right? It's like half the country is kind of conservative, or at least maybe skeptical of the legacy media narrative. The legacy media really stopped doing journalism and started just doing pure activism, pushing out agendas, pushing out a narrative. And they left this opening, right? And so there were a bunch of little upstart conservative media outlets, or just sort of centrist media outlets, center-right media outlets. And what the legacy media then did is they turn around and start calling those groups far right. And you and I get this quite a bit, Keean, where they try to discredit us by just saying, well, they're far right. And it's like, okay, like what makes us far right? Right? Like when we first launched Juno News, Andrew Coyne wrote a column in the Globe and Mail calling Juno News far right. And I got into an argument with his editor, and I was like what about Juno News is far right? Like explain to me how I personally am far right. And she couldn't, and she just said, look, our columnists get a degree of latitude, and also he didn't call you far right, he called Juno News far right. I bring this up because I wanted to specifically ask you about this piece. There's an organization called Anti-Hate Network, the Anti-Hate Network, antihatenetwork.ca, and they wrote an article about us after the debate. So just to provide clarity for folks, the Anti-Hate Network is a government-funded organization. They exist because of grants from the Trudeau government, and now, I believe, from the Carney government. And their whole mandate is what they say to expose hate on the far right. They don't focus on radical Islam. They don't focus on like the Hamasniks dominating the streets. They only focus on what they call right-wing, far right, white supremacist neo-Nazi movements. And they kind of like conflate all those things together, right? So on their website, many times they describe the far right and they use terms like neo-Nazi and white supremacist. And then here they had an article about Juno News after the debates, the leaders' debate scrums. The headline says, far-right media outlets dominate post-debate scrum. 6 of the 17 reporters who asked questions came from Rebel News, True North, and Juno News, okay? So in one breath, they say the far right is an extreme problem to do with all of these crazy like Nazi ideology. And then they're also like, oh yeah, and True North, Juno News, and the Rebel are all also far right. The article is just ridiculous. Like they basically just complain that you and Alex Zoltan managed to get to the front of the line to ask your questions to Mark Carney before other journalists, and somehow that's like a government problem or something like that. Like to me, it's just like these journalists aren't very good at like, you know, if you part of being a journalist and the skill is getting a question to the leader. So figuring out how to get your question in. And it just seems like I mean, it's totally over the top. I don't take a lot from Anti-Hate Network. I think it's a totally disgraced organization that should not exist. And hopefully if Pierre Poilievre does win an election, he will defund this organization. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on that specific article.
Yeah, the Anti-Hate Network is this band of basement-dwelling neckbeards that have nothing going for them in their lives outside of government grants that fuel their ability to smear and lie about anyone who thinks that the government should tax people less so that they have less the government has less agency to give grants to morons like these people. Like if you think the taxes should be lower, you're a white supremacist to them. If you've ever had a conservative idea cross your mind, you are a white supremacist Nazi. You might as well have a membership to Hitler's Nazi party in the Third Reich. That's what goes through these morons' head. And then they pontificate it on this website domain that they're only able to afford because of government grants. They actually wouldn't be able to afford it without it. Maybe they get some private donor funding from, I'm not gonna guess where they might get other money from, but it's a joke. And, they've been following me since I was a student in university, saying that I am these terrible things, which I'm obviously not. You and I have become friends over the last several years. And I think that as well as anyone that I'm the furthest thing from a white supremacist. I'm very much a conservative. And I might even say that I'm like a very much a right-wing person, like more than most people. But does that make me a Nazi? No. Does that make anyone a Nazi if they think that immigration should be lower, for example, which is one of the things that just ticks them off? They'll call you a Nazi real quick if you think immigration should be reduced, let alone eliminated or net zero or net negative even. They will just call you the most harshest, crude things in the world. once a sensible government, and I might even say that Mark Carney is slightly more sensible than Justin Trudeau. I think if I were them, I'd be sweating bullets right now that their grant funding might not last. And they're going to be grasping at straws to create this boogeyman, this ghost, this thing for Canadians and the government and MPs to be worried about, that there's this like surge of racism, Nazism, and white supremacy in Canada, so that they can justify the grants that they get that pays their mother basement rent. So they're going to pretend like there's this big issue. There's not. It's obvious. When you look at the issues in terms of hate in this country, it is the hate marchers on the street that are
Exactly.
attacking Jewish fathers on the street. The government of Canada literally shipped in ISIS women, ISIS families from Syria, and gave them candy and room service. When ISIS was a huge issue, they're like, no, 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 you should come to Canada and we'll keep you safe. This is your home. And they think that that is not a problem, but we are the big boogeyman in the room, which really tells you something. I think that they're willing to ignore Hamas, agents of Hamas, agents of the Iranian National Guard in Canada, and they think that that's not an issue. That's not what they're going to spend their precious grant money on. No, they're going to focus on us. It's a joke. These people are despicable, and they're not going to last long. Because they don't have Trudeau around anymore to coddle them and pretend like there is this big white supremacist boogeyman in the room.
Well, 100%. There are actual real national security issues. There are real security threats. You mentioned the Iranian Quds Force. Like Canada has the largest number of Iranian regime officials living in our country thanks to the Trudeau government, and the anti-hate network just doesn't care. And actually, they exposed it. We have the receipts right here. Ariella Kimmel, who I actually used to work with in the federal government, she was talking about how so basically after the October 7th attack, anti-hate network didn't say anything. They didn't condemn it. They didn't say anything. And then like a month later, they finally put something out, and it said how Canada's far right is spinning the war to its advantage. Right. So they finally found a way to tie it to the far right. So Ariella Kimmel just says it's almost comical. Months after the massacres in Israel, she goes on to just say the anti-hate network finally put something out, and it's somehow blaming the right. Bernie Farber, who is, I believe he's like the founder or was the former executive director of this organization, says not just the right, but the far right, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and the like are actively, especially now, targeting both Jews and Muslims. So again, they found a way to spin it. And notice how he says the far right, right? So he's like, oh, it's not just the right, it's the far right. But just remember, in that news article, they called you and I far right. So when they're talking about far right, they just mean conservatives. They mean mainstream conservatives. Anyway, Ariella and Bernie go back and forth. And finally, at the end of this thread, Bernie lets the cat out of the bag. He says, Ariella, the anti-hate.ca focuses on the extreme right. That is what it does. I wish that we had the resources to do more. We just don't. So there it is. They don't care about extremisms and radical Islam. They don't care about foreign regime officials in the country. They don't care about the far left Antifa. Hey, a church in Montreal was firebombed last week on camera by Antifa while they were flying a flag. That's outside their purview. They only focus on the far right, and they get government funds to do it. Of course, there is no equivalent on the other side, right? There never is. And, you mentioned that you consider yourself right-wing. When I was going back and forth with the editor of the Globe and Mail about whether or not it's fair to call me far right, I said, look, like, I'm a mother. I have 4 kids. I'm married. I'm a Christian. Like, I was part of the Conservative Party. I worked for Jason Kenney. I've worked for Danielle Smith. I wrote for the Toronto Sun for almost a decade. I'm mainstream. I interviewed Pierre Poilievre. Like, how is it that you can call me far right? I'm like a mainstream, normal Canadian. And again, she just had to say, well, it's not just you, it's your organization, which, when you start an organization, there isn't really much of a difference. Like calling my organization far right, but saying that I'm not is just, it's just total like mental gymnastics, basically. Well, I want to end on a positive note, Keean, not just talking about some of our detractors. And so I noticed that we were named as one of the top 20 Substack influencers in the world. So this was an article written by a platform called Favicon, the top 20 Substack influencers in world politics in 2025. And we are ranked number 4 in the entire world. All of the other ones in the top 10, I believe, are all Americans. There's a couple other Canadians on the list. Paul Wells was number 13. Jen Gerson-Line was 15. And all the way near the top, number 4 is Juno News. So I think it's really exciting
Yeah.
just to be having, I guess, that influence on a global stage, even to see our small little Canadian media company grow so much. It's really exciting. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about what we have in store for the rest of the year and for the future?
Yeah, I mean that's such great news, and it's so rewarding to actually see real results. I'll say it right now. The anti-hate network is never going to rank on a global list of influence like that. And as I said earlier, the reason why we have grown so quickly is because we're brutally honest, we punch hard, we punch up, and we have a national network that we've quickly grown across the country where we can cover any story from a local political issue to a national issue in Ottawa and everywhere in between. We have exposed why the mainstream media is failing because they haven't been able to be as nimble as us. They haven't been able to be as honest as us. We are so lucky that we do not, like the anti-hate network, rely on a grant from a political benefactor to continue our operations. We don't need to lie through our teeth or create some fake boogeyman in order to continue doing what we do, to continue sharing the truth, to continue our research and deep dives and the documentaries that we're working on. We don't rely on any of that. We rely on our viewers, not even through the donation model that the Countersignal used to rely quite heavily on. Which I'm glad we did because that helped the Countersignal grow really quickly as well, and it was a really important part of our business model. And we still do take donations here at Juno News. We're not going to say no because it helps us hire more, it helps us do more, it helps us create these documentaries that we're talking about. I don't know if you've shared that with your audience yet, that we're working on these longer form content pieces now. But what we do is we rely on the subscriptions of people. It's a marketplace. People can subscribe or they don't have to subscribe. And more often than not, people decide, yeah, I want to see the news that Juno News is producing because they're the only ones that I can trust. I can't trust the CBC. I can't trust the Toronto Star to tell me what is honestly going on in Richmond, where people's houses are being confiscated by the state. Not being confiscated, I shouldn't say that, but
Well, their land is, the title is being taken away.
the value is zero. Who's going to
Right.
buy that property now?
They can't. I
And
mean,
and the,
yeah.
the CBC's not saying that. They're talking about how it's a win for global indigenous rights because allegedly these people fished on a river nearby once. So let's just invalidate tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in private property value, let alone the crown land value that every Canadian should, has a God-given right to enjoy. The benefits and beauty of crown land should not be given to random groups of people who have no legal claim to it. It's this made up idea. Anyways, the CBC's
Well, wait,
lying
and
about
just
it.
just to add one more layer on top of that, Keean, then we see like the Adams Lake Band in northern British Columbia up past Kamloops, where they put signs up saying no settlers. And I interviewed
Yeah.
John Rodstad, leader of the BC Conservative Party, yesterday. He says that exists all over the province, where they not only they take the land that used to be accessible to all Canadians and say this is private, this is now Indigenous land, but then they also say no white people allowed, which is incredibly racist, and it goes against the entire spirit of our country, which is a partnership between the French, the English, and the First
Let's
Nations.
talk about what's happening to Corey Morgan with the Western Standard, who went to the Siksika Nation, which is it is I live right off the Siksika Nation. That's where I grew up. Um, and Corey Morgan went to go expose the decrepit third world situation that many of my friends who I went to school with, have to live in because they don't have private property rights, because there's no accountability with band structure and leadership, like Stephen Harper tried to put in and then Trudeau just repealed it. They're living in squalor and the most decrepit, unsafe conditions. Their houses burn down every second week over there because there's no safety standards. No, it's terrible. And Corey Morgan goes there to explain to the average Canadian who probably has never stepped foot on a reserve, to show what it looks like. And retroactively, that band says, no, you are a colonial settler. And we're going to charge you with trespass retroactively, which is not just an attack on his mobility rights and his rights to be somewhere in Canada and his journalistic rights. It's a huge attack on his free speech. Retroactively charging someone a fine because you said something that an Indian band disagrees with is a joke. It's a total disgrace, and it's one example of many that we've talked about of this, the very fabric of our country being redefined in real time over the course of the last 5 years. I don't even think that Mark Carney is the focus of what we need to be looking at right now. It is the judges, it is the manipulators, it is the liars, and it is the unraveling of our Canadian identity and core belief structure and values and freedoms on the basis of the lies of these mass graves, which is really what I think kickstarted this UN drip, UNDRA garbage. That's going to be my focus, and I think hopefully our focus as we try to defend the rights of Canadians by exposing the truth about what's going on.
It's funny because I increasingly believe that that is the biggest issue in the country. Look, it's hard to go around Toronto, like even just the mall by my house, Vaughan Mills Mall. It does not feel like Canada. Like it really feels like a third world country. It's unbelievable how much Toronto specifically has changed over the last 5 to 10 years because of mass migration. The demographics is totally different, and it's easy to see those as being the biggest. It related to the biggest issues in the country to do with crime and, of course, the liberal revolving door prison system, catch and release policies, all of that. But when you take a step back and you think about like what it means to be Canadian, what we're teaching the next generation, just our belief in our country, I think the issue that you were just talking about, it sort of goes against the very core of whether or not Canada can be a country, whether we're a legitimate country or whether they see us as invalid settlers, that Canada needs to be disintegrated and that private property needs to be given to other groups. So these are all issues.
This idea of truth and reconciliation, which is just like this idea of truth and reconciliation, it implies that at some point we must be reconciled, right? Like at some point we must move past this idea that Canada was stolen. Okay, what is it going to take, right? In Siksika, Justin Trudeau came over there and he gave them like $1.23 billion. He just handed them a blank check. He said, here you go. There's a big ceremony. It was an insane amount of money per person there. These people should all be rich, but they're not. They still live in these decrepit situations, which makes you think, maybe it's the Indian band leadership that needs to be held accountable. Maybe something's going on here that the average Indigenous person is not actually benefiting from this Indian industry scam of same thing happens up in northern BC, up where they were putting the Northern Gateway pipeline through. The average Indigenous person there was working on the pipeline, wanted it to go through, was seeing the benefits of industry and building and the growth of the country. But the Indian band and these hereditary leaders of the Indian band, they were the ones that were trying to pocket more money. They were the ones that were trying to seize more control. And it's just not going to work. Something is going to explode in this country, and not in a good way. It's not the economy. There's the social fabric of this country is disintegrating before our eyes, and it is the most important thing to be talking about right now.
Well, 100%, Keean. I really appreciate your time today. We have a special clip that we are going to share you. This is the highlights of our time so far at Juno News. 6 months in, we have so much more planned. We're just getting started. This is the very beginning. We are on a mission to replace the CBC. We want to become the biggest, most important, most influential news company in the country. And so if you haven't already, head on over to junonews.com. Join us. Become a premium subscriber. That helps us fuel our journalism. And to end the show, we are going to share this montage of some of our best moments here at Juno News. Thank you so much. I'm Candice Malcolm. That's Keean Bexte, we're the founders of Juno News. Thank you and God bless.
Today, we're announcing that we're joining forces to change the media landscape in Canada.
We are announcing the launch of Juno News. What is your position on the right number in terms of the levels for permanent residents?
Bring in a simple mathematical formula that says we cannot bring in people faster than we add houses.
Carney's doing exactly the same thing. He's looking like Trudeau 2.0 all over again, except this time on steroids.
Your entire campaign does seem to be predicated on putting you in the front and hiding the people that stood in lockstep with Justin Trudeau for the last 10 years. I'm wondering how you reconcile this and how you can trust their judgment.
Do you believe that women biological women have the right to their own spaces.
This has been a 3-year culmination for us, and to think that it was our last rally, and being with all of the people, they shared their stories, their pains, their struggles, and we're doing it for them.
I'm really excited and really proud of what we have built together. I say together because we would not be here without the audience, without viewers like you, without the people who are subscribers to Juno News.
Do you really think that Western Canada is at the point where it won't last another 4 years, it won't stand for it, and that is perhaps how Mark Carty will go down?
And what's most worrisome in Western Canada is the utter indifference of the Central Canadian elites and media to this phenomena. And even the misreporting on it, they keep thinking it's just an Alberta phenomenon.
If a clear independence referendum landed on the ballot, how would you vote?
I'm prepared to put that to Albertans, and I'll let them decide.
How do you see that movement playing out?
My job is to see this very legitimate concern that Albertans have, that Canada is just not working for Alberta. We are on Team Canada, but Team Canada is not on Team Alberta.